I walked into Carter Tower at 8:20 that morning, 10 minutes early, and that was the first sign that something had shifted inside me. In my old life, I always showed up late to places like this, not because I didn't respect time, but because I never truly believed I deserved to be there. I used to step through those glass doors feeling like an outsider, a guest in my own family's building, a son who had to earn every single second of attention. Today, everything felt different because I finally understood that people don't care about your intentions. They only care about your position. The security guard at the entrance scanned my ID, and his eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second before he straightened his back like I was someone important. "Mr. Carter," he said, and I nodded back with a simple good morning. He opened the gate and added, "Welcome back," and those two words used to mean nothing to me, but now they landed differently, not because I craved respect, but because I had stopped running from my own name. I walked through the lobby, and I could feel the employees watching me, some recognizing my face, others whispering behind their hands. "That's Ryan Carter." I thought he turned down the inheritance. He did, so why is he here now? I kept walking, didn't slow down, didn't offer any explanations, because I had spent too many years justifying myself to people who had already made up their minds about me. The elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside, and as they closed, I caught my reflection, same college kid, simple clothes, old watch, calm expression, but that face belonged to a completely different person now. When the elevator reached the executive floor, my father's assistant, Linda, was already waiting, and she had worked for the Carter family for over a decade, so she knew everyone, including me. She looked surprised. Not because I had arrived, but because of the way I arrived, no hesitation, no nervous fidgeting, just steady presence. "Mr. Carter is waiting," she said, and I nodded and thanked her. She walked beside me for a few seconds before she finally asked, "Ryan, can I ask you something?" I stopped and said, "Sure." She hesitated, then said, "The last time you came here, you looked like you wanted to leave, but today, you look like you own the place." I didn't answer right away, then I said, "Maybe I finally realized I do." Linda looked at me differently then, for the first time. She wasn't seeing the young man who avoided responsibility, she was seeing someone else entirely. She opened the conference room door and said, "Your father is inside." I entered, and the room was exactly as I remembered: long table, massive windows, the Carter Holdings logo looming behind my father's chair, with 3 lawyers and 2 senior executives already seated. Richard Carter, my father, stared at me for several long seconds, and nobody spoke until he checked his watch and said, "You're early, I don't like wasting time." The room went quiet because everyone noticed that he didn't say good morning or welcome, he was testing me. Attorney Miller opened the file and said, "Ryan Carter, according to the trust agreement established by your grandfather, you have the right to accept 35% voting control of Carter Holdings." He pushed the documents toward me and added, "Once signed, this decision cannot be reversed." I picked up the pen without a second of hesitation, without a single doubt, and I signed. The scratch of the pen against paper was the only sound in that entire room. When I finished, Attorney Miller collected the documents and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Carter." I nodded, but I wasn't celebrating. This wasn't a victory, not yet. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. My father looked at me and asked, "You understand what comes next?" "Yes," I said. "You will be questioned." "Yes." "You will be challenged." "Yes." "You may lose support from people you thought were close." I looked straight at him and said, "I already know." He studied my face for a moment, then asked, "Who?" Meaning, who changed me, who made me stop being the old Ryan. I answered, "People who showed me exactly who they were." My father didn't ask again. He understood. The first meeting after I became a shareholder wasn't about celebration, it was about business, and the executives started presenting reports on revenue, investments, and future plans. I listened carefully, took notes, and didn't interrupt, and that surprised everyone because they expected a young heir trying to prove himself with loud opinions. Instead, I watched, I studied, and I waited. After 40 minutes, the CFO, Mr. Anderson, finished his quarterly review and said, "That concludes the quarterly review," and everyone relaxed. Then I spoke, "Not yet." The room froze. My father looked at me. "Mr. Anderson turned, and I opened the report to page 47. Why did Carter Logistics approve a $12 million investment into Horizon Transportation? Mr. Anderson checked the document and said, "It was considered a long-term opportunity." I nodded and asked, "Who approved it?" He glanced toward Jason's empty chair and said, "Jason Carter." I turned another page and asked, "Why?" Mr. Anderson answered, "Because he believed the company had growth potential." Then I placed another document on the table and said, "Then explain this." Everyone leaned in and the document showed Horizon Transportation's financial records: negative growth, heavy debt, declining contracts. Mr. Anderson adjusted his glasses and said, "We were aware of those risks." I nodded and said, "Then why did we pay 8 times the company's actual value?" Nobody answered. My father looked at me and said, "You think something is wrong?" I closed the folder and said, "I think we need to investigate." The executives exchanged uneasy glances because I hadn't accused anyone, I hadn't attacked, I just asked the only question that mattered: where did the money go? Attorney Miller immediately started taking notes, and my father said one word: approved. That single word changed the entire atmosphere because everyone understood that the new Ryan Carter wasn't here to play games. After the meeting, I returned to my temporary office, and I had barely sat down when my phone rang. Jason. I looked at the screen, then answered. "So it's true," he said. I leaned back and said, "What? You accepted?" "Yes." His voice turned colder. "You didn't even tell me." I looked out at the city and said, "Why would I?" A pause. "Because I'm your brother." I almost smiled, because the old Jason always used family when it benefited him. And I replied, "Family didn't stop you yesterday." Silence. He knew I knew. His voice dropped lower. "You saw?" "Yes." Another silence, then he said, "Ryan, you don't understand what you're doing." I looked at the documents on my desk and said, "I understand perfectly." "No, you don't," he snapped, and his voice grew sharper. "You think this is about Emily?" I didn't answer. He continued, "You're angry." "No," I said. "Then what?" I looked at the Carter Holdings logo on the wall and said, "This is about control." Jason stopped because he understood the conversation had changed. I wasn't talking as his younger brother anymore. I was talking as a shareholder. "You've changed," he said. "Yes." "Because of us?" "No," I said, then paused, "because of myself." I ended the call. That evening, Emily sent me a message: "I need to see you." I looked at it, and then another message arrived: "Please." The old Ryan would have rushed over, believing this was a chance to fix things, but the old Ryan was the reason I had already lost. I replied with one word: tomorrow. No emotion, no explanation. Her response came immediately: "Okay." But I knew she wasn't calm, she wasn't confident, because for the first time, Emily Brooks was worried about losing me, and she still didn't understand that she had already lost me the moment she chose my brother. The next morning, I returned to campus, not because I missed it, but because I needed to finish what I started. The strange thing about returning to a place where your old life ended was realizing how small everything looked now. The dorm building, the classrooms, the path where I once chased after Emily, all of it felt different, not because the campus had changed, but because I had. Students walked past me with books and coffee. Having no idea that yesterday I was just another student, but today my name was already spreading, not because I wanted attention, but because money always attracts attention. A few classmates noticed me, and one stopped near the stairs and asked, "Ryan, is it true?" I looked at him and said, "Is what true?" "You joined Carter Holdings." I nodded and said, "Yes." His expression shifted immediately. "Seriously?" "Yes." He smiled and said, "That's incredible." I nodded politely and walked away, because a year ago that reaction would have mattered, but today it didn't. I had learned that people often respect your success more than your character. At noon, I met Emily at the same coffee shop, the same table, the same place where she once told me she loved my ordinary life. She arrived 10 minutes late, something she always did before, and I used to wait, but today, I just kept reading my documents. When she sat down, she looked at me and said, "You really went through with it?" I closed the file and said, "Yes." She looked around and said, "You're serious?" "Yes." She studied my face. "You don't even look nervous." I picked up my coffee and said, "Should I?" Emily didn't answer because she knew the old Ryan would have been nervous, would have worried about what she thought, would have asked if she was still angry, but this Ryan didn't. She leaned forward and said, "Ryan, I think yesterday was a misunderstanding." I looked at her and said, "A misunderstanding?" "Yes." I waited. She took a breath and said, "Jason and I were just talking." I almost smiled again, the same sentence, and I said, "Talking?" "Yes. People usually don't kiss while talking." Her expression froze, and she looked away. "Ryan." I didn't raise my voice or insult her, I just said, "I saw everything." The silence became uncomfortable, and she finally whispered, "Okay." One word, not an apology, not an explanation, just acceptance that hiding was no longer possible. I waited, and she continued, "Jason and I made a mistake." I looked at her and said, "A mistake?" Yes. I shook my head and said, no. She looked at me, confused. I placed my cup down and said, a mistake is forgetting an appointment, a mistake is saying something wrong. I looked directly at her and added, choosing someone else is not a mistake. Her eyes changed for the first time. She saw that I wasn't trying to get her back. You hate me, she said. No. Then why are you acting like this? Because I understand now. Understand what? That I was holding on to something that wasn't real. She became quiet and looked down. I did love you, she said softly, but those words didn't affect me anymore. I asked, if you loved me, why did you choose him? She didn't answer, because there was no answer that made her look good. I stood up, and she looked up and said, where are you going? Back to work. She stared, you're leaving? Yes. Just like that? I looked at her and said, yes. She whispered, you changed. I nodded and said, yes. Then I walked away. That afternoon, my first official company meeting began, and Jason was there. This time, he wasn't smiling. The conference room was full of board members, executives, and department heads, with my father at the front and Jason sitting across from me. The meeting started with financial reports, and everything seemed normal until I opened my file and said, I have questions about several investments. Jason looked at me and said, already? I ignored him and turned to the CFO, Carter Logistics. Why did the company invest $12 million into Horizon Transportation? The room went quiet, and Jason leaned back and said, it was my decision. I looked at him and said, I know. Then why ask? Because I want to know why. Jason smiled and said, because it was a strategic investment. I opened another document and said, strategic? Yes. I pushed the report forward and said, then why did the company ignore 3 years of negative growth? Jason's expression shifted slightly, and the CFO looked uncomfortable. Jason said, business decisions involve risks. I nodded to correct and turned another page, but risks should benefit the company, not private connections. The room fell silent, and Jason's face hardened. Are you accusing me? He said. No, I answered, I'm investigating. That difference mattered, because accusations can be denied, but investigation cannot. My father looked at the documents and said, continue. I continued, the company needs a complete review of all investments approved during the last 3 years. Jason immediately objected, that's unnecessary. I looked at him and said, why? Because it wastes time. I smiled and said, then you have nothing to worry about. Silence. His eyes turned colder because he knew I wasn't attacking. I was opening doors that he didn't want opened. The meeting ended with the investigation approved, and after everyone left, Jason stayed behind and closed the door. You're trying to destroy me, he said. I looked at him and said, no. Then what? I picked up my files and said, I'm finding out what you did. His face darkened. You think you're better than me now? I looked at him and said, no, I think I'm finally done being beneath you. I left that night. The first news report appeared, not about the investigation, but about me. Carter family heir Ryan Carter returns to business. The article was everywhere, and everyone who had ignored me before suddenly remembered my name, but one person didn't celebrate. Jason, because he knew something nobody else knew. The investigation had only started, and I was looking at the same past he had spent years trying to hide. My phone received a message from Jason, you have no idea what you're uncovering. I looked at the screen and replied, you're right. 3 seconds later, another message appeared, about what? I typed, I'm uncovering more than you expected. I put my phone away because, for the first time, Jason Carter was afraid of what I would find. He was right about one thing, I had no idea how much I would uncover, because the deeper I looked into Carter Holdings, the clearer the pattern became. Jason didn't suddenly become corrupt, he had been preparing for years. The problem was that everyone saw what he wanted them to see, a responsible son, a talented businessman, a future CEO, and nobody looked behind the image, except me. 3 days after the investigation started, I sat in my office reviewing old financial records from the company archive, which contained thousands of files. Most people would have given up after the first few hours, too many numbers, too many names, too many transactions, but I wasn't looking for everything. I was looking for something specific, a connection that Jason thought nobody would notice. At 11:40 a.m., I found it, a company called Horizon Capital. On paper, it was an independent investment firm. But the ownership records showed the same people appearing again and again, different companies, different names, same network. I printed the documents and called attorney Miller, who answered immediately. Ryan, I found something, I said. What? Horizon Capital. There was silence, then he asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes, send me everything." "I already did." He paused. "You work fast." I looked at the documents and said, "I don't have time to work slowly." After the call ended, I continued reviewing, and then I found another name, Emily Brooks. My hand stopped, not because I was surprised, but because I finally had confirmation. Emily wasn't just someone caught between Jason and me, she was connected, and the question was how deep. That evening, I received an invitation to a university alumni dinner. Normally I wouldn't attend, but the organizer was a major Carter Holdings partner, so I decided to go. When I arrived, the atmosphere changed immediately. People recognized me. Some approached me for conversations, others for connections. The same classmates who once ignored me suddenly acted like we were close friends. One walked over and said, "Ryan, congratulations." I nodded and said, "Thanks. You're really joining Carter Holdings?" "Yes." "That's amazing, I always knew you were different." I looked at him. A year ago, those words would have impressed me, but now they sounded hollow. I smiled politely and said, "Enjoy the dinner," then walked away. Near the entrance, I saw Emily standing alone, no Jason beside her, which surprised me, because in my previous life, they were always together. She saw me, and for a moment she didn't move, then she walked toward me. "Can we talk?" she said. I looked around and said, "Here?" "Yes." I nodded, "Okay." She took a breath and said, "I know you're angry." "No." She looked confused. "You're not?" "No." "Then what are you?" I looked at her and said, "Disappointed." Her expression changed because that word hurt more than anger. She lowered her voice. "I never wanted things to become like this." I asked, "Like what?" She looked away. "I don't know." "That's the problem." I said, "You always say you don't know, but you knew exactly what you were doing." Silence. Her eyes turned red. "I made a mistake," she said. I shook my head again. She looked at me and said, "What?" "You keep calling it a mistake." I stepped closer and lowered my voice. "It wasn't, it was a choice." She had nothing to say. Then someone interrupted. Jason walked over. "Ryan," he said. I turned, and he looked between us, then at Emily. His expression changed. "We need to leave," he said to her. Emily looked at him and said, "No." That surprised both of us. Jason frowned. "What?" Emily looked uncomfortable and said, "I said no." For the first time, I saw tension between them. Interesting, Jason had started losing control even over Emily. Jason looked at me. "This is your fault." I looked at him. "Everything is always someone else's fault with you." His face hardened. "You think you've won?" I answered, "No, I think you're finally being seen." Jason stepped closer, his voice lower. "You don't know what you're doing." I smiled. "That's what you keep saying." I looked at Emily and then back at him. People usually say that when they are afraid someone does. Jason's expression turned cold, and he grabbed Emily's arm, not hard, but hard enough for her to notice, and enough for me to notice. Emily pulled away and said, "Jason." The room went quiet, and Jason released her. For the first time, the perfect couple didn't look perfect. The next morning, Attorney Miller came to my office and placed a thick folder on the desk. "We found more," he said. I opened it. Inside were emails, contracts, private agreements, and one document that immediately caught my attention. A partnership agreement between Jason and Horizon Capital. The beneficiary section was clear: Jason Carter and Emily Brooks. I read it twice, then closed the folder. Attorney Miller watched me. "There is enough evidence for legal action." I nodded. "Not yet." He looked surprised. "Not yet?" "No." "Why?" I looked at the documents. "Because Jason is still dangerous." He waited, and I continued. "He knows he's being investigated, so desperate people make mistakes." I picked up my phone, and a message from Jason appeared. "You want a war? Fine." I looked at it and deleted it. Attorney Miller asked, "Was that him?" "Yes." "What did he say?" I stood up. "He finally admitted there is a war." I walked toward the window. Outside, Carter Tower stood above the city, the same building Jason dreamed of controlling, the same building I once abandoned. Now I just need him to show everyone how far he is willing to go. Because the truth was simple: Jason didn't lose because I exposed him, he lost because he believed he was untouchable, and people who believe they cannot fall always fall the hardest. Jason didn't wait long. The attack came 2 days later. Not against me, but against my reputation, and that was exactly what I expected. Money could be replaced, positions could be challenged, but reputation was something people protected fiercely, and Jason knew that. He knew if he could make people doubt me, he could slow everything down. At 7 a.m., an article appeared online: Ryan Carter takes control after years away from business. The headlines sounded harmless. But the content wasn't. It questioned my experience, my education, my sudden return, and suggested I accepted the inheritance only because of personal problems. The message was obvious: Ryan Carter is emotional, unstable, not ready. I read the article in my office, then put my phone down. Linda stood near the desk and said, "Do you want us to respond?" I looked at her. No. She seemed surprised. No? But this could affect your reputation. I opened the financial report in front of me. Only if it is true. Linda watched me, and I continued. People who know the truth don't need an explanation, and people who don't will believe whatever they want. Linda nodded slowly. She understood I wasn't fighting every rumor. I was building something stronger than rumors: results. By noon, the board members started asking questions, not because they believed the article, but because they wanted to see how I would react. That was the real test. At 1 p.m., I entered the executive conference room, and Jason was already there, looking relaxed, too relaxed, with a smile on his face. "Busy morning," he said. I sat down. "Not really." He laughed. "You saw the news?" "Yes." And what?" He leaned back. "You don't care." I looked at him. "Should I?" Jason smiled. "You're different now." "Yes. Before, you would have panicked." I opened my folder. "Before, I cared about what people thought, and now I care about what they can prove." His smile disappeared slightly, because that was the answer he didn't want. Jason built his entire strategy around perception, but I built mine around facts. The meeting started, and a board member brought up the article. Mr. Collins said, "There are concerns about public opinion." I nodded. "I understand." Jason looked at me, waiting for me to defend myself, but instead I opened another file. "I have something more important." Everyone looked at me, and I placed documents on the screen. "These are the latest findings from the internal investigation." Jason's expression changed just slightly. I continued. "The company approved several payments through outside consulting firms that weren't included in previous reports." The CFO looked at the documents. "These were hidden under different departments." The room fell silent, and Jason spoke. "This is not evidence of wrongdoing." I looked at him. "No, not yet, but it is evidence that someone wanted these transactions to avoid attention." Nobody spoke. The board members started reviewing the files, and Jason looked around, losing control of the room. "Ryan, you are creating suspicion without proof," he said. I looked at him calmly. "No, I am creating questions, and questions are exactly what you are afraid of." The silence after that sentence was heavy. After the meeting, Jason followed me into the hallway and closed the door behind us. His expression was completely different. No smile, no confidence, just anger. "You think you're clever," he said. "No," I said. "Then what?" "I think you made yourself easy to find." His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're doing." I stepped closer. "You keep saying that. Maybe you should stop explaining how powerful you are and start proving you are." Jason stared at me, then said something unexpected. "You really don't care about Emily anymore." I didn't answer. He smiled a bitter smile. "That was the only thing I could use against you." I looked at him. "Exactly." His smile disappeared. "You admitted." "Yes, she was your strongest weapon. Now she is just another person connected to your mistakes." Jason's face changed because he understood that Emily was no longer protecting him. She was becoming evidence against him. That night, Emily came to see me again. This time, she didn't look angry, she looked scared. When I opened the door, she immediately said, "Jason knows about the investigation." I stepped aside. "Come in." She entered and looked around my apartment, the same place, but everything felt different. She sat down and said, "He thinks you're trying to destroy him." I poured water. "I'm not." She looked at me. "Then what are you doing?" I placed the glass in front of her, finding the truth. Emily lowered her eyes. "You don't believe me anymore." "No." The answer was immediate. She looked hurt, and I continued, "Because you gave me reasons not to." Emily stayed quiet, then whispered, "I didn't know things would become this serious." I looked at her. "What did you think would happen?" She didn't answer because she knew. She thought she could control both sides. She thought Jason would win. She thought I would forgive. "I never wanted you to get hurt," she said. I nodded. "But you were willing to let it happen." Silence. Then she said, "Ryan, can you really throw away 3 years?" I looked at her. "No." She looked hopeful for a second, then I finished. "I already threw away the illusion. The 3 years were real, but the person I thought I spent them with wasn't." Emily looked down for the first time. She didn't argue, she simply accepted it. The next morning, Attorney Miller arrived with the final report and placed it on my desk. "We found the connection," he said. I opened the folder. Inside was everything we needed: Jason's private company, Emily's agreement, the hidden transactions. I looked at the final page, a signature: Jason Carter and Emily Brooks, together, planning everything. Attorney Miller said, "This is enough to remove him permanently." I closed the folder and said, "Good." He looked at me. "What now?" I looked toward Carter Tower through the window. "Now we let everyone see who Jason Carter really is. Because until now, Jason was fighting a battle against me, thinking he could still win, but he didn't understand one thing: I was never trying to defeat him, I was exposing him. And once the truth was visible, nobody could protect him anymore." The final board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, and Jason knew something was coming. I could tell from the way he walked into the building. The old Jason always moved like the company belonged to him. But that morning he walked slower, looked around more, noticed who was watching him. That was the difference between confidence and fear. Confident people look forward, fearful people check who is behind them. Jason entered the conference room at 9:55, and everyone was already seated: my father, the board, the legal team, the executives, and me. Jason looked around, then smiled and said, "Interesting." Nobody answered, and he sat down. He looked at my father. "Is this about the investigation?" Richard nodded, "Yes." Jason leaned back. "I assume so." His calm expression returned, but this time everyone had seen behind the mask. Attorney Miller placed a folder in front of every board member and said, "These documents contain the results of the independent investigation." Everyone opened the files. Jason didn't touch his. He looked at me. "You really prepared everything," he said. I looked at him. "Yes." He smiled. "You planned this from the beginning." I shook my head. "No." I pointed at the folder. "You did." The board members started reading. And the room became silent. Page after page, transaction after transaction, every hidden connection, every private agreement, every decision made for personal benefit instead of the company. Jason remained quiet until one board member looked up. "Mr. Collins said, Jason, is this accurate?" Jason answered immediately, "No." "Then explain." Jason looked at the documents, then at me. "Ryan has been targeting me since he returned. He came back angry because of personal issues." I almost expected that. Jason always chose emotion when facts became dangerous. He turned to the board. "He is using his position to destroy me." My father looked at him. "Are you saying the documents are fake?" Jason stopped. 1 second, 2 seconds, too long, and everyone noticed. Finally he said, "No." The room became colder, and Richard asked, "Then what are you saying?" Jason had no answer because there wasn't one. The truth was already sitting in front of everyone. I opened my folder and placed one more document on the screen, and the room changed instantly. Jason saw it, and for the first time, his expression completely collapsed. It was the private agreement between him and Emily, promising her shares after he gained control of Carter Holdings. Nobody spoke. One board member looked at the document, then at Jason, then at me. "Mr. Collins said, Emily Brooks." Jason's face turned pale, and I answered calmly, "Yes." The room became uncomfortable because this was no longer only about money. It was about betrayal. Jason stood up. "This proves nothing." I looked at him. "Really?" "Yes, this is a personal agreement." I nodded. "Yes, but it was created using information obtained through my relationship with Emily." Silence. I clicked the next page, and another document appeared: messages, questions. Emily had asked me for information and passed it to Jason. The board members read everything, and this time nobody looked confused. They understood Emily wasn't just involved. She was part of the plan. Jason finally lost control. He shouted, "You don't understand." The entire room froze because Jason never raised his voice here, not in front of these people. He pointed at me. "You had everything. You were born with the Carter name. You had the inheritance, the trust, father's approval, and everyone still looked at you first." My father looked at him, and Jason continued, "I worked twice as hard, and they still chose you." There it was, the truth, not business, not strategy, jealousy. Jason had spent his entire life believing something belonged to him. He didn't want to build his own future, he wanted mine. I looked at him. "You could have built your own, you had the same opportunities, but you wanted what belonged to someone else." Jason's breathing became heavier. The board members watched him. The perfect future CEO was gone, and only the real Jason remained, a man angry because he couldn't steal anymore. The vote happened 30 minutes later. And the result was unanimous. Jason Carter was removed from all executive positions, his authority suspended, his company access restricted, and the legal department began reviewing his personal transactions. When the meeting ended, everyone left, and only Jason remained near the window, the same window where executives once congratulated him. Now he stood there alone. "You think you won," he said. I picked up my files. "I know I stopped losing." He turned. "You're still my brother." I looked at him. "That stopped mattering when you decided I was someone you could sacrifice." His expression changed for a moment. He looked like he wanted to say something else, an apology, an explanation, anything, but Jason Carter had spent his entire life avoiding responsibility, and even now, he couldn't say it. So he walked away. That evening, the news spread, not because Carter Holdings released a statement, but because people inside the company talked. Employees learned, partners learned, investors learned. The man who was supposed to become the next CEO was gone, and the new face of Carter Holdings was me. My phone rang. Emily. I looked at the screen, then answered. She didn't speak for several seconds, then finally Ryan. Her voice was different, not confident, not defensive, just tired. "Yes," I said. She whispered, "It's over." "What is?" "Everything. Jason lost everything." "Yes." A pause. "Are you happy?" I looked out at the city. The question was strange because months ago, I thought revenge was what I wanted. But standing there, I realized something. I didn't feel happy because Jason lost. I felt free because I no longer cared. I answered, "No." She sounded surprised. "No?" "I'm relieved." Silence. She understood because losing someone and escaping someone are different things. "Can we meet?" she whispered. I closed my eyes for a second, then answered, "No." "Why?" I looked at the Carter Holdings logo on the wall, because I already said goodbye. The call ended, and this time Emily didn't call back because even she understood that the person who always waited for her was gone. After Jason was removed, many people expected the company to celebrate victory parties, public announcements, a dramatic declaration that the Carter family had survived a crisis. But I refused all of it because I knew the truth. Removing Jason was not the end, it was only the beginning. A company damaged for years couldn't be repaired by removing one person. It needed rebuilding, and rebuilding required discipline, not celebration. The first thing I changed was the approval system. Every major investment required independent review, every financial transfer needed multiple signatures, and no single executive could move millions based on personal relationships. Some executives complained, saying it slowed decisions, but I told them, slow decisions are better than expensive mistakes. Nobody argued after that because everyone knew what had happened. 3 weeks later, Carter Holdings held its annual shareholder meeting, and for the first time, I stood on the main stage as one of the company's leaders. Thousands of employees watched through the internal broadcast. Investors watched, the media watched. A year ago, nobody thought I would be standing there. The host introduced me, Ryan Carter, shareholder and executive representative of Carter Holdings. The applause was polite, respectful, but I knew that people don't trust speeches. They trust results. I walked to the microphone and didn't prepare a long speech. I didn't talk about family or about Jason, I talked about the company. Carter Holdings spent years building a reputation, I said, looking across the audience, and in recent months, we damaged that reputation. The room became quiet. Most executives avoid admitting problems publicly, but I didn't. I continued, the way we recover is not by pretending nothing happened, it is by proving we can do better. The employees listened as I announced the restructuring plan, new oversight, new investment standards, new leadership goals, no excuses, no hiding. When I finished, the applause was louder, not because I was powerful, but because I was honest. After the meeting, my father found me backstage and stood there quietly, then he said, "You sounded like your grandfather." I smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is. When you first refused the inheritance, I thought you were running away." I didn't respond, and he continued, "But now I understand, you weren't afraid of responsibility, you were afraid of becoming someone you didn't want to be." That sentence stayed with me because it was true. I wasn't afraid of business. I was afraid of losing myself. But now I understood that power doesn't change people, it reveals them. Jason didn't disappear. People like him rarely disappear quietly. After losing his position, he started contacting old connections, former partners, investors, friends, trying to convince them he was still important, but the world had changed. The same people who once answered immediately started ignoring him. One afternoon, I received a report from Attorney Miller. Jason had attempted to create a new investment company, but several investors refused to work with him. The reason was simple: trust, once broken, it's difficult to rebuild. Attorney Miller placed the report on my desk and said, "He is struggling." I looked at the report. "That's his problem." He nodded, then asked, "Do you want to take legal action?" I thought about it. The old Ryan would have wanted revenge. Would have wanted Jason to suffer, but that person was gone. I closed the report. "Only if he breaks the law." Attorney Miller looked surprised, that's all? After everything he did? I looked out the window. I don't need to destroy him, he already destroyed the person he wanted to become. Emily was the hardest person to completely remove from my life, not because I still loved her, but because she was connected to the past, the life I lost, the person I used to be. Several weeks passed without contact, then one evening I received an invitation to a charity event. I almost ignored it until I saw the organizer, Emily Brooks. She knew exactly why she invited me. She wanted a conversation, one final attempt. I decided to go, not because I wanted to return, but because I wanted closure. The event was held at a downtown hotel, and when I arrived, Emily was already there. She looked different. Not physically, but emotionally, the confidence she once had was gone. When she saw me, she walked over and said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded, "I won't stay long." She accepted that, "I know." We stood near the balcony, the city lights surrounding us, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I was wrong." Simple, direct, the words I waited years to hear, but hearing them now felt different. I asked, "About what?" She looked down. "About you. I thought you were weak because you didn't fight. I thought you were someone who needed other people to protect him, but I was wrong." I nodded, "Yes." She took a breath. "I thought Jason was stronger." I looked at her, "And now?" She smiled sadly. "Now I know strength isn't just about taking things." Silence, she said. "I lost the best thing I had." I didn't answer because I knew what she meant, but I also knew something else. She didn't lose me because Jason existed, she lost me because she chose him. I said, "You didn't lose me when you kissed him, you lost me when you decided I was worth less." Her eyes turned red, and she looked away. No argument, no excuse, because there was nothing left to say. Emily whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded, "I believe you, but sorry doesn't change the past." She understood. A few minutes later, I left. No anger, no hatred, just peace. 2 months later, Carter Holdings announced record growth, the company recovered, investors returned, employees trusted the leadership again. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about the past because I finally understood that the best revenge wasn't watching people fall, it was building a life they could never reach. But I didn't know one thing yet. Jason still had one final move, and this time he wasn't coming after my position, he was coming after my name. Jason's final move came quietly. That was how he always operated, not with strength, but with calculation. 3 months after leaving Carter Holdings, he disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no complaints, no angry posts, nothing. Most people thought he had accepted reality, but I knew better. Jason Carter never accepted losing. He waited, he watched, he looked for another way back, and he found one. The first warning came from Attorney Miller, who arrived at my office early in the morning with no smile, no small talk, that told me everything. He placed a folder on my desk and said, "We have a problem." I opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, a lawsuit. I read the first page. Jason Carter was challenging the inheritance agreement. The claim was simple. He argued that my grandfather's decision was influenced by unfair family pressure, that my father favored me, and that the inheritance process was manipulated. I looked at the papers, then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Jason couldn't defeat me in business, so he tried to attack the foundation. Attorney Miller watched me. "He is trying to freeze your voting rights during the legal process." I closed the folder. "Can he?" "No, because the agreement is strong, but he has enough connections to make this complicated." Complicated, that was Jason's strategy. He didn't need to win immediately, he only needed to create chaos. Chaos gave him time, and time gave him opportunities. I looked at the documents again, then asked, "Who helped him file this?" Attorney Miller hesitated, and that hesitation gave me the answer, "Tell me." He placed another document on the desk, a consulting agreement, and I read the name, Emily Brooks. For a moment, the room became quiet, not because I was surprised, but because I finally understood. This was their last move, not Jason alone, not Emily alone, but together, just like before. That afternoon, I went through every memory from my previous life, not literally, but the memories, the events, the choices. I remembered the first time Jason and Emily betrayed me, the second time, the final time, and I finally saw the pattern. They never believed they were doing something wrong, they believed they deserved what I had. Jason believed he deserved my inheritance, and Emily believed she deserved Jason's future. Both of them looked at my life and saw something they wanted, not a person, but a resource. My phone rang. My father. I answered. "Ryan." "Yes. I heard about the lawsuit." "I know." A pause. "I'm sorry." I looked out at the city. "For what?" "For not seeing it earlier. I spent years comparing you and Jason. I thought competition would make you stronger." I leaned back, but it made him desperate. My father was silent, then said, "What are you going to do?" I looked at the documents. The old Ryan would have reacted emotionally, but the new Ryan had a different approach. "I'm going to show the truth." The court preparation lasted 2 weeks, and Jason tried every possible angle. He claimed my grandfather didn't trust him, that I manipulated the family, that I was unprepared to lead. But every argument had one problem. The facts: my grandfather's trust documents were clear, the legal process was documented, and the decision was made years before. Jason wasn't fighting because the agreement was unfair, he was fighting because he lost. On the day of the hearing, Jason arrived wearing an expensive suit, the same style he wore when he thought he was untouchable, and Emily arrived with him. They walked into the courthouse together. And the cameras noticed. The headlines wrote themselves: "Former Carter heir challenges family inheritance with support from former girlfriend." But this time, I didn't care. The courtroom was quiet. Jason's lawyer presented their argument, talking about family influence, unfair advantage, and my lack of experience. Then my lawyer stood and presented the evidence: the original trust agreement, the independent evaluations, my grandfather's personal statement, everything. The judge reviewed the documents, then asked Jason's lawyer, "Are you claiming this trust was created illegally?" "No." "Are you claiming the signatures are false?" "No." "Are you claiming the beneficiary was changed improperly?" "No." The judge looked at the documents. "Then what exactly is your argument?" Silence, because there was no argument, only jealousy, only regret, only a person who wanted something after realizing he lost it. The case ended quickly. The inheritance remained mine, and Jason's final attack failed. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Jason walked out first, his expression cold, and Emily followed. Then I walked out. The cameras turned, and one reporter shouted, "Ryan Carter, do you have anything to say about your brother?" I stopped. The old Ryan would have answered emotionally, but this Ryan didn't need to. I simply said, "The truth doesn't need revenge." The reporters became quiet, and another asked, "Do you forgive him?" I looked toward Jason. He stood there waiting, and I answered, "I moved on." That was all, because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and moving forward is not the same as allowing someone back into your life. That evening, Jason called me. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice sounded different, older, tired. "You really changed," he said. I sat in my office. "Yes." A pause. "I used to think you were weak. I thought you would always need people." I looked at the Carter Holdings logo. "And now?" Silence. Then he said, "Now I know I was wrong." It was the closest thing to an apology Jason had ever given, but it was too late. I said, "Jason, you didn't lose because I became stronger, you lost because you never respected me when I was weaker." He didn't answer, and neither did I. The call ended, and that was the final conversation between us. 1 year later, Carter Holdings reached a new record. The company expanded internationally, the employees who once questioned me now trusted me, and my father retired from daily operations. I officially became CEO. The announcement was made on a Monday morning. The same day I once walked away from Emily outside the dorm, the same day my old life ended. But this time, I wasn't losing anything, I was gaining everything. Still, there was one final thing left: the past, and I was ready to close the chapter forever. Becoming CEO of Carter Holdings was not the ending I expected a year earlier. I thought winning meant watching Jason fall. I thought revenge meant seeing Emily regret her choices. I thought the moment they lost everything would be the moment I finally felt complete. I was wrong. The biggest victory was not seeing them lose, it was realizing their choices no longer controlled my life. The morning I officially became CEO, I arrived at Carter Tower before everyone else. The building was quiet. No employees rushing, no meetings, no phones ringing, just silence. I stood in front of the company logo, the same logo I once ran away from, the same place where I believed I didn't belong. I remembered. The first day I walked into this building after my rebirth, everyone looked at me differently. Some doubted me, some questioned me, some waited for me to fail. But I stayed, I learned, I proved myself, not with words, but with results. The elevator opened, and my father was standing inside. Richard Carter, the man who built the company, the man who once thought I wasn't ready. He looked at me and smiled. "CEO on your first day." I smiled. "Technically, the title starts today." He laughed. "Still the same person." I looked at him. "No." He raised an eyebrow, and I continued, "I'm a better one." My father nodded because he knew that was true. The CEO announcement happened at noon. The conference hall was full of employees, executives, shareholders, media representatives. Everyone was waiting. The host stepped onto the stage. "Today, Carter Holdings officially announces Ryan Carter as the new Chief Executive Officer." The applause filled the room, and I walked onto the stage. I looked at the crowd, and years ago I stood outside this world, but today I was leading it. I didn't give a speech about victory, I didn't mention Jason or Emily, because my future was no longer built around them. I said, a company is not built by one person, it is built by everyone who chooses to protect it. I looked at the employees. Titles don't create leaders, choices do. The applause came again, but this time I didn't hear approval. I heard trust, and that meant more. After the ceremony, I returned to my office, and a small package was waiting on my desk, no sender. I opened it. Inside was an old photograph, my college graduation picture, with Emily standing beside me and Jason in the background. The person who sent it was obvious. I turned the photo over, and one sentence was written behind it. Do you ever miss who we were? Emily. I sat there for a while, not because I wanted to go back, but because I remembered the old Ryan, the person who loved without limits, the person who trusted without conditions, the person who believed everyone deserved another chance. That person wasn't foolish, he was just young. I picked up the photo, then placed it into a drawer, not thrown away, not destroyed, just stored, because the past didn't need to be erased, it just needed to stay where it belonged, behind me. A month later, I saw Jason again, not in a boardroom, not in court, at a small restaurant downtown. I was there for a business meeting, and Jason was sitting alone at another table. The difference was impossible to miss. He used to walk surrounded by people, executives, partners, friends, but now he sat alone. He noticed me, and for a moment neither of us moved, then he stood. Ryan, he said. I nodded. Jason. He looked at my suit, then at the restaurant around him. A strange expression crossed his face, not anger, not jealousy, something closer to regret. You really did it, he said. Yes. He smiled slightly. I thought I would be the one standing there. I knew what he meant. Carter Holdings, the CEO position, the future. I said, you could have built your own. He looked down. I know. Those two words surprised me, because Jason Carter rarely admitted anything. He continued, I spent my entire life looking at what you had. I never thought about what I could create. I didn't answer. Jason looked at me. Do you hate me? The question was unexpected. I thought about it, then answered honestly, no. He looked surprised. No? I shook my head. Hating you would mean you still matter. The words were harsh, but true. Jason accepted them. After a few seconds, he nodded. I understand. Then he left, and that was the last time I saw him. Emily sent her final message 6 months later. She didn't ask to meet, she didn't ask for forgiveness, she simply wrote, I hope you're happy. I looked at the message, then replied, I am. That was all. No anger, no explanation, no unfinished business, because there was nothing left. Years passed. Carter Holdings continued growing. My father enjoyed retirement, my relationship with my family became stronger, and I built a life based on my own decisions, not fear, not approval, not someone else's expectations. One evening, I returned to Westbridge University, the place where everything started. The dorm building was still there, the old oak tree was still there, the same path, the same bench. I stood there for a moment. And a younger version of me once stood in this exact place, a young man holding coffee, waiting for someone who would never choose him. I looked at the tree and I realized something. That day wasn't when I lost Emily, that day was when I found myself. Because sometimes the people who leave you behind are not taking something from you, sometimes they are clearing the way. My phone rang. I looked at the screen, a message from Carter Holdings, another successful quarter, another milestone. I smiled, then I walked away the same way I did years ago, but there was one difference. Back then, I walked away because I had nothing. Now, I walked away because I had everything. I was Ryan Carter, not the man who was betrayed. Not the brother who was underestimated, not the boyfriend who was abandoned. I was the man who chose himself, and that was the one thing nobody could ever take from me.